Welcome to the Honest Hour. I'm your host, Luis Acevedo, and we have a lot to talk about today. But before we jump into topics, we're going to give it some time here to let people come on in because there are some really important things that I want to cover in this episode that I think will be helpful to you guys, extremely helpful. And so, we're going to give it a little bit here, let some people come on in. In the meantime, I've decided I need to do something about my weight. It's not good. So I have decided to start doing some kickboxing. So it's also self-defense and help me get in shape. I boxed, I wrestled when I was younger. But I have not been doing much exercise. I've been doing like 100 push-ups and 100 jumping jacks every day. But I also want to be in better shape, and I also want to do some exercises that are going to be more practical than anything. And what better thing than, some form of self-defense. And in my opinion, I think a striking self-defense is the most applicable in the real world because the last thing you want to do is get on the ground. However, I know that you can get on the ground in those kind of scenarios. But anyway, so I'll be doing that in the near future, looking forward to it. Was going to do it today, but my stomach started acting up. So I'm going to take a little break and just do the show today and work a little bit outside of that. But yeah, so there's a lot that we really need to cover. Defunding the police is a disaster waiting to happen. Yeah, we'll see. So, let's jump right into it. So the first topic here for everybody that's on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and that's listening to audio in the future, we have a green screen on TikTok. It has Defund the Police, Private Security, Science Skeptic, the PSYOP no one talks about. These are going to be the topics of discussion today. And they're revolving around real articles. And so for the Defund the Police, I believe there's a bigger agenda there than most even can fathom. So already as a disaster, police don't show to robberies and theft. Yeah, so let's jump into it. So for everybody on YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch, you're going to be able to see what the others can't as I'm going through these slides. So let's jump right into the first article here, right? So the first article that I have is in regards to defunding the police. It's a representative. Her name is Cori Bush. I mentioned her yesterday. So in the title, it says, Defund the Police advocate, Representative Cori Bush, spent nearly $400,000 on campaign private security. And so this is a report that came out, and basically what the Republicans are trying to do here, which I get completely, is show how hypocritical she is, that she's willing to spend absurd amounts of money for her own protection. But she does not want to. Yes, we will take live guests. We will allow people to come on here once we get through the topics of discussion. So just bear with me here, and then we can have conversations about what was covered and everything. So, so of course, they're trying to paint her as a hypocrite because she's stating that, well, I want to protect myself, which is why we have the private security. So she spent like $500,000 or $400,000 on private security and wants to defund the police. Well, there's something else going on in America. And that is a pension funded crisis. This is all related, trust me. There's a pension fund crisis in America. So a bunch of people are unaware of who handles their 401k, who handles their pensions. Well, for a long time now, they've handed it over to Wall Street executives. These Wall Street executives have grossly mismanaged your money in a 401k, your money in a pension fund. And now they're becoming insolvent. But don't worry, Joe Biden came to the rescue with the American Rescue Plan, giving the economy, it was a stimulus of over almost $2 trillion. And a large portion of that went to keeping the pension fund solvent. And another thing that they helped was the pension benefits. I believe it's called Gratuity Corporation, which that is essentially the safety net for pension funds. Okay, so that the safety net for pension funds is also insolvent. But the government decided, we're going to give them a bunch of money so that way they can remain solvent for another 29 years. kick the can down the road type deal, right? And the issue is a lot of public jobs are enticing because of their pension fund. But the pension funds aren't going to be there. The pension funds aren't going to be there. And so this ties into the defund the police, because if you recall, the police were working with BLM to get body cameras. The police had wanted body cameras long before the BLM movement. And then they had partnered with BLM to get the body cameras, something they didn't want to do. And so I think cops are going to want to go private, okay? Because now you have a huge demand for U.S. retailers to hire private security guards. And so what we're witnessing with the defund the police is a movement taking place because they can't afford the pensions of the officers. And cities are becoming so chaotic. The retail stores in certain cities like Starbucks and Starbucks particularly has shut down like 16 locations recently because of how bad the cities have gotten, right? And now what we're going to see is police forces moving from public protection as the police to private security. That is the trend that we're seeing, and we can see this very well in South Africa. South Africa basically has a bunch of de facto city-states within itself controlled by the private security companies. And so we're going to be witnessing the same thing here in America, is what I'm thinking this whole defund the police movement is. It doesn't matter if you're for it or against it, but what you should realize is where we're heading. And where we're heading is towards privatization of police. Maybe it's less training, maybe it's more training, because they're going to be a private company, so there's going to be different standards. Why not just use the National Guard? Guys, I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying, but that's okay. Those who do understand it. So we're not heading towards anarchy. We're always going to have order. And so the privatization of the police is a new form of order. This is why here at MOT, we are big proponents of people localizing their supply chains, because it means more than being able to get your local food, but have people nearby who will come to your aid if you need it. That's the most important thing. And also, we should know that the police aren't there. They have no obligation to protect and serve the people. They don't. Don't get me wrong. I get it. Police are good by and large. I understand that. However, their job is to protect the system, not necessarily the people. And so the privatization of the police could be somewhat beneficial, but there's going to be its pros and cons. There's an interesting book that I would, looks like that, The Police to go into. Yeah, so there's a interesting book that I would recommend everybody check out to get an idea of how this privatization will work. It's called The Forever War. I've mentioned it numerous times on the stream. Long story short, it's this war that's taking place in the intergalactic realm. So time dilation's included, which is why it's called a forever war. Anyway, so they get back on Earth after being in space for so long. And Earth in the United States particularly has degraded so much that everybody has to have a private bodyguard in order to roam the streets. Even the people who are in the military have to have a private bodyguard to roam the streets safely. And they are the ones who are enforcing order. So the police don't really do anything, right? But it is the private security that really enforces this. And so I'm not saying that this is a good or bad thing. I'm saying that there are things that are coming our way that we should be aware of. And so defund the police is probably related to a pension fund crisis nobody's talking about. And then we see U.S. retail stores getting private security companies to protect their stores as opposed to police officers, because there's a short staff of police officers and there's not going to be enough funding to keep the police officers as it is. So that's the first thing that I really wanted to touch on. I think it's very important. And then the next thing that I really wanted to cover has to do with the biggest psyop in the world that nobody talks about. So this was a tweet that I saw yesterday on Instagram, actually. Somebody had posted it on Instagram. And so it says, reminder that your kids should leave home at 18 is a psyop by the central bank to make 10 extended family members pay 10 rents mortgages, 10 sets of utilities, 10 car payments, and 10 of every item needed for a home, plus entertainment and stress, relief to cope with being alone. This is so true. One of the biggest psyops that we've ever seen is to leave the home. Leave the home. That's the most unnatural thing to do. You should live with your parents pretty much your entire life. And your parents should do the same for their parents. Households should be multi-generational. And right now what we have is a segregation of family and an extraction of wisdom and roots, right? We're pulling up the roots of family members. We're getting rid of that entirely. And so what needs to happen, in my opinion, is a reversion back to the old ways, which is you live with your family, you take care of your family, and you make homes to fit multi-generational. Not just, oh, this is for me and my wife and my kids, and when my kids turn 18, they're on their own. That's such a sick thought. It's disgusting, in my opinion, to say, oh, you're 18 years old now, you're your own adult, you have to go do your own thing. Police take an oath to protect and serve. Well, the Supreme Court said that they have no obligation to protect and serve the public. Just saying. Anyway, so this is huge. And people don't even think about it, right? Because if you were able to have a multi-generational home, you understand how much more resourceful and wealthy you would be. You understand that? Let's say you have 10 family members. Let's say you have 5 men that are working. The other 5 are the women that are raising the children. Well, let's say you, as the 5 men, are making an average salary of $50,000 a year. So 50 times 5, what's that? 100, 200, 250, right? $250,000 a year is what you are now bringing in, as opposed to just $50,000 spread across multiple mortgages, multiple car payments, multiple utility payments. But no, now it's under one roof. And this is how you have true power. And they don't, the elite don't want you to know this. This is how you retain power, is keeping everything within the family as far as the wealth comes and the resources, having multi-generational homes. Don't encourage your children to leave home at 18. Don't do that. Especially don't send them to universities where they're just indoctrination camps. Nah, bro, I'm one of the elite. Bro. Right on. Good for you. So that's the biggest psyop in the world that nobody's talking about. Nobody's talking about that. Now, I've seen people in here saying, oh, man, you're a science skeptic. All right, so we'll let you in here in a second, Joey Cauldron. I just want to cover this really quick. So this is the main reason why I say I'm a science skeptic. This has been going on for quite some time. Doesn't mean that I don't think science is real. What I'm saying is this. Science as it stands today does not stand up to science itself. It's not scientific. It's become a religion. And you're skeptical of the process of science? No, I'm not. Scientific method is legit. The issue is scientism has taken over science, which is the religion of science. And I'll prove it to you right now. I talk about this a lot, and a lot of people seem to be totally unaware of it. And it's called the replication or the reproducibility crises. So basically what that means is that there's no ability to reproduce the studies in certain fields of science, and it plagues all of science. So nobody says that they don't believe science, but if you're really paying attention here, you'll get something from this. It should make you smarter, all right? So for instance, one of the fields that it plagues is psychology. So about 36% of the replications yielded significant findings in the field of science, in the field of psychology. And now we have study replication rates were 23% for the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, 48% for Journal of Experimental Psychology, 38% for Psychology, Science Studies in the field of cognitive psychology, had a higher replication rate of 50% than studies in the field of social psychology, 25%. And then in Nature and Science, findings that were about 62% could successfully be reproduced. So this is for the field of psychology. Now let's go into the field of medicine. So 16% were contradicted by subsequent studies. These are out of 49 studies, 16% were contradicted by subsequent studies. 16% had stronger effects than a subsequent study. 44% were replicated. 24% remained largely unchallenged. That's pretty big. Nearly a quarter of them were unchallenged. And for those of you who don't have the IQ to understand what I'm saying here, you should probably just be quiet or leave. Because those who are in the chat that really want to know this will listen. Because this is very informative. Nobody is saying science isn't real. The scientific method works. It does. It's true. I don't believe in science because science is real. What I'm a skeptic of is scientism. And what we have right now in science is so studying psychology isn't currently consistent, therefore science bad. No, it's plaguing all of science. So you just sit here and listen. So this is in medicine, right? So medicine. And then we have found that the University of Texas found that only 11% of 53 preclinical cancer studies had replications that could be confirmed, that can confirm conclusions from the original studies. Only 11%. 11%. Yeah, we're talking about medicine now, bro. Keep up. Or else you're going to get kicked out. And you're just going to have to listen from the sidelines. Taking this live. It's human error interpretation, then not the process of science. No, it's the process that we are failing in universities. There's no standard. You guys aren't listening. That's okay. I get it. The average intelligence is dropping precipitously in the United States. And now we go to economics. So we just went through psychology. We just went through medicine. Now we're going through the economic fields. Everything science is subjective. Science is not supposed to be subjective. So now we go into economics. So it says economics is lagged behind other social sciences, psychology, and attempts to access replication rates and increase the number of studies which attempt replication. A 2016 study in the journal Science replicated 18 experimental studies published in 2 top-tier economic journals between 2011 and 2014. It found that 39% failed to reproduce the original study. About 20% of studies published in the American Economic Review are contradicted by other studies, despite relying on the same or similar database. A study of empirical findings in the Strategic Management Journal found that 30% of the 27 retested articles showed statistically insignificant results for previously significant findings. That's economics. Now, what about the hard science, though, right? What about the hard science? Well, here we go. So, a 2016 survey by Nature on 576 researchers who took a brief online questionnaire on reproducibility found that more than 70% of researchers have tried and failed other scientist experiment results. Did you hear that? 70% of researchers have tried and failed to reproduce other scientists' experiment results. Now, what fields does this include? 87% of chemists could not reproduce the findings. Holy crap, 87% of researchers were unable to reproduce other scientists' findings. 77% of biologists. 69% of physics and engineers. 67% of medical researchers. 64% of earth and environmental scientists. And 62% of all others. And more than half have failed to reproduce their own experiments. However, less than 20% have been contacted by other researchers unable to reproduce their work. The survey found that less than 31% believe that failure to reproduce results means the original result is probably wrong. That's insane. Although 52% do agree that a significant replication crisis exists. So 52% of researchers and scientists believe that there is a significant replication crisis that exists. Is this for everything or the control chains? What findings? Just all of them? It's a variety. So, I mean, we can go into the nitty gritty for some of them, right? So I have a couple here. So, for instance, Ecology and Evolution from the National Library of Medicine. The publication is titled, not the publication, but the article is titled, Doesn't Believe in Science and Electricity. Nobody is saying I don't believe it. You guys are obviously getting triggered and not understanding the point that I'm bringing here. My point is there's a replication crisis in science. That's all, across all fields, from psychology to chemistry to biology to engineering to medicine to chemistry, across the board. So this article is titled Rate and Success of Study Replication in Ecology and Evolution. So let's see here. In the abstract, which this is just, basically what it's about, it said, I found that approximately 0.023% of ecology and evolution studies are described by their authors as replications. 2 of the 11 original replication study pairs provide sufficient statistical detail for 3 effects so as to permit a formal analysis of replication success. Replicating authors correctly conclude that they replicated an original effect in 2 cases. In the 3rd case, my analysis suggests that the findings by the replicating authors was consistent with the original findings, contrary to the conclusion of the replication failure by the authors. Now, then there's this interesting article here from Cosmos magazine. It's titled, Half of Evolutionary Biologists Fudge Results. Studies find bioscience faces a replication crisis. So in 2015, the world of psychology research was rocked with more than 100 scientific collaborated in an attempt to reproduce the results of 100 studied, published in 3 leading journals, and found that in many cases they couldn't. That was in psychology. And so then what we find out is that one of the most important elements of the scientific method is the assumption that if one branch of science repeats the experiment of others using exactly the same method, then the results should be identical. The fact in the targeted psych studies also between 1/3 and 1/2 of the original studies were repeated has been dubbed a replication crisis or reproducibility crisis and continues to generate debate today. Now, we go down here. We find this. Across both ecologists and evolutionary biologists, a whopping 64% confess to cherry picking, some 42% indulge in p-hacking, mainly by collecting more data after the results were in, and 51% omit to reporting unexpected results in ways and made it appear they had predicted from the start. Now, let's stick on evolution a little bit more. How do you replicate I don't know. You're the smart guy in here. You're the one telling me what science is and what science isn't. This is why I said, if you don't have the intelligence to be in here, maybe you should be quiet and just listen. All right? So, right here is an interesting piece from The Guardian. It is titled, "Do We Need a New Evolution Theory?" And this was published June 28 of 2022. Joey, you'll have your chance to come in here, but you can't deny there's a replication crisis. There's no denying it. It's a fact, as I've stated. So let's go over biology. So where's the quote that I want? All right, we'll start from this. So this is an article. My point is you can't get the same results with different variables. No, you're not paying attention, because if you're studying the same thing, you should be able to reproduce the same thing in order to get the same results. So if you're going to say X causes ADHD, well, then you should be able to show that in studies. The issue is science isn't publishing incentives. We'll talk about it. I'll let you up here in a second once we finish this. So let's go over this one last paragraph here. For one thing, it starts midway through the story. He's talking about the eyeball, right? So how the eyeball comes into play. Taking for granted the existence of light-sensitive cells, lenses, and irises without explaining where they come from in the first place. This is what evolution doesn't do. Evolution doesn't explain this. The evolution theory doesn't explain these things. They start in the middle, and he's using the eye in this article as an example. Nor does it adequately explain how much delicate and easily disrupted components mesh together. Mesh together to form a single organ. And it isn't just eyes that the traditional theory struggles with. The first eye, the first wing, the first placenta, how they emerge. Explaining these is the fundamental motivation of evolutionary biology, quote unquote, says Armin Moksek, a biologist at Indiana University. And yet, this is his quote again. Did you not just listen to me? This is a quote from a biologist at an Indiana University. It says, this is literally a quote from Armin Moksek, a biologist at Indiana University. Says the first eye, the first wing, the placenta, how they emerge. Explaining these is the foundational motivation of evolutionary biology. And then he goes on to say, and yet we do not have a good answer for this. The classical idea of gradual change, one happy accident at a time, has fallen flat. Dude, you guys are, I'm quoting a biologist from Indiana University. This was his quote. Okay. And then the article goes on to state, actually, let's go on to this. So this is a Yale University biologist, Grunter Wagner. It says, if we cannot explain things with the tools we have right now, we must find new ways of explaining them. And this is in the context of this. So the article continues saying, there are certain core evolutionary principles that no scientists seriously question. Everyone agrees that natural selection plays a role, as does mutation and random chance. But how exactly these processes interact and whether other forces might also be at work has become the subject of bitter dispute. And then the quote goes, if we cannot explain things with the tools we have right now, the Yale University biologist Grunter Wagner told me, we must find new ways of doing them. So, we'll see what happens. But now we'll let Joey in here, see what he has to say about the reproducibility crises, and go from there. So,
yep.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. I don't really know much about the the medicine replication crisis. The way you kind of framed it seemed kind of like suspicious to me. Not like that you're suspicious. It just seemed kind of leading in the sense that
I was literally, just so you know, when I was going over the reproducibility crises, I was reading from main sources. I mean, these are studies that were found in certain journals. I even listed the journals that these were found in. So this is not me just being rhetorical. This is me being extremely dialectic.
Well, they're being rhetorical. I'll explain to you my logic, right? I think what you said was, correct me if I'm wrong, right? That X percentage of scientists or whatever, right, couldn't reproduce, admitted to not being able to reproduce a study, correct?
So the exact quote was this, and it was a survey done by Nature. So Nature in 2016 did a study, or a survey rather, of 1,576 researchers. They took a brief online questionnaire on reproducibility and found that 70% of researchers have tried and failed to reproduce other scientists' experiment results. And then it goes into other fields of science, like this happened 87% of the time in chemistry. This happened 77% of the time in biology. And this is by researchers, by the way, who are in these specific fields. And this was by Nature. And this was by Nature, which is a world-renowned scientific journal in many regards.
Okay, yeah. Well, the problem that I have with this is that they're just saying that they've encountered this thing. They're not telling you the frequency to which they've encountered this thing.
Yes, 70% of the time.
So
70% of the time when they try to reproduce a study, it fails.
No, 70% of them admitted, right? No, it wasn't 70% of the time.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I misworded that. You're absolutely right. 100%.
Right, cool. So if 70% of them admitted it, right, those 70% aren't telling you the frequency in which that's happened, right? So we can't really make any judgments about like the degree that this replication crisis is happening in these fields. But I could talk about the social psychology field that I really wanted to, that's the one that I know most about. I mentioned something earlier about the publishing. I don't know if you remember that. The way that these publishing companies, these publishing houses work is they are for-profit businesses, and the way to get for-profit or to make money is to push out studies that have new findings. Right? There's no money in finding out. Oh, hey, we did a study and we found out, yeah, this thing is right. So naturally, just because of the financial incentives that people have, that you're going to end up skewing science or quote unquote science. The same thing happens with when you mentioned p-hacking earlier. All of these like perverse like financial incentives that have to get filtered through like this like capitalist system that we've enmeshed into our academia. It has to there's a really good quote by this guy named Max Planck, who's a physicist. He said that science moves at the rate of its obituaries, and the reason he says that is that because when you get a job, right, you're working for your living, right? So when you get tenure, right, that's like the goal of every academic, and the way to get that is through like putting out ideas or whatever, right? So if somebody comes along and they attack your ideas, they're not really just attacking your ideas, they're attacking your future prospects of making money. So we're not even no longer really talking about like science, we're talking about like politics basically, right? And I just want to like just make a quick point. Like I am skeptical of science, but I feel like we're skeptical of it in a completely different way. It seems like you said something earlier how we had better science before, and then now we have kind of crappy science.
I never said that. No, I don't think that I said that. My point is, I stated numerous times that there's no need to believe in science because science is real. But what science has become is scientism, a form of religion. And then this has become a form of religion because it's precisely of what you're talking about. I couldn't agree with you more. You're hitting it right on the head.
Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you that I think that science is basically all a religion. I mean, I don't think that it's like not necessarily like like wrong. Like obviously I believe the electricity works, but like the way that these things have you ever heard of Thomas Kuhn?
Yes, the paradigm. Yep.
Yeah.
Scientific revolutions.
I mean, for anybody who's not aware of him, basically his point was that we tend to look at science as sort of being like this like naturally progressive thing where we build on top of the other, right? But in reality, it kind of moves through paradigms where you have normal science, right? Where you'll have somebody that will like have some crazy outlandish idea, right? And then they'll get sort of like basically boxed out by the sort of like academia. But I don't want to explain it too much.
Well, that was Spinoza. I think Spinoza said that. He was like, hey, an idea starts off being ridiculed and then it eventually gets accepted as truth. But Thomas Kuhn basically made the argument that there's paradigm shifts in science and that certain studies built upon other studies will then disprove other studies and then lead us into something else. So yes.
Yeah, it isn't as cut and dry as most people tend to think of it as. But I was going to say something else. Sorry. There's a bunch of things that you went through that I wanted to talk about that I didn't really write down. Um,
Well, we're agreeing right now, my man. So I mean,
yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah. We are agreeing a little bit. I just disagreed with with the way that we're sort of framing the replication crisis as being a result of science rather than a result of just the publishing agencies. Like, I still think that you
no.
can use.
So once again, as I addressed, I was just illustrating a
Yeah,
replication crisis. I wasn't blaming it on
yeah,
anybody in particular. I was just stating the crisis that is real, because you don't know this, but on many streams, I have pointed this out to very, I would say, scientific evangelicals or whatever, um,
yeah.
who refuse to believe that a bunch of science is built on, pretty much all of science, all of math is built on a lot of presuppositions. And I
Mhm.
understand how a lot of people don't get this because they don't study philosophy. They don't know that
Yeah.
philosophy is the beginning steps of science. Any scientific field, you need philosophical thought in order to even get experiments. So I get how people have a hard time believing it. So my whole point in going into this detail is, hey, science is not as cut and dry as you think. You should not accept everything that you're being told because it's scientific, because there's a huge crisis going on in the scientific field. I've interviewed people on my podcast on MOT Media, if you guys want to check it out, who are in the academic fields, and they stated precisely what you said. And I couldn't agree more, that it is a financial incentive, that the people want to keep their jobs, and if you disprove them, they can lose their jobs. This is a point that I've actually made in previous streams.
Yeah.
That's the exact point I've made in previous streams, actually. And this is why we need to be skeptical of science, and why
Yeah.
we need to pay attention to where the money's coming and what intention, because this just means that there's a lot of things that we can be taught right now in our schooling system that are built on lies because scientists didn't want to lose their job. Not saying there's a lot of it, but there's a chance of it. And so we just need to be alert and vigilant when it comes to anybody with a lab coat stating that they know what they're talking about, because we know that there's this effect, right? I can't remember the study that they did, but there was this one effect where people, if you were wearing a white lab coat, that they were more likely to trust you. And so we don't even understand that they do that all the time in media as well. So this goes down very deep. But my whole point of addressing this is to be aware that there is a serious problem going on in publications, in journals, that the news will tell you experts say X when really it's Y. Or they'll come out with two contradictory studies and claim that they're both right. So there's a huge problem, and I agree with you. A lot of it has to do with funding. Almost all of it has to do with funding.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know, because earlier you said that that science isn't subjective, and that's what I'm trying to
Yeah, so I think that there are certain fields of science, the soft scientists, political sciences, psychology, sociology, those things can definitely be subjective. However, there are things in physics, there are things in chemistry, arguably there are things in biology that are not subjective and are objective, right? And the things that we know about the earth, like science is an attempt to discover how things work, the process of how things work. And in a way, you can try to get to the truth with science, but you can also get to the truth in other realms too. This is a big misconception people have. You can get to the truth through philosophical thought, not just science. But anyway, science
this is where we kind of disagree then, because like I don't even think that hard sciences are objective, and I feel like I could make a pretty good argument specifically with physics to prove that it isn't.
Yeah, go ahead. I'd love to hear it.
So, like we mentioned Thomas Kuhn earlier, but one of the examples that he gives is the transition from from Einsteinian physics, from Newtonian physics into Einsteinian physics.
Good point.
Right. So the fundamental difference between those two things was interpretation of data. Right. It wasn't like that they were doing math. Right. Both of these people, or both of these camps. Right. Like, for a good minute, like, their theories were just theories. We had no sort of like hypothetical understanding of like what validated one versus the other. Yet we did have this like what's it called? The shift that had nothing to do with like adding up numbers. It had to do with basically challenging certain assumptions that we had about basically the speed of light.
Yes.
Einstein, like Newtonians, believed that basically light was instantaneous, and so the question that they were asking was, why was light? What was this thing that was slowing down light, right? But that question of asking, what's this thing that's slowing down light, right, sort of assumes that light is being slowed down rather than it just being like a fact of itself.
Mm-hmm.
So like, if we look at the difference between what Einstein did versus what the Newtonians did, like all that they were doing was just like connecting the dots in a slightly different way. Like that was fundamentally it, right? And it's you mentioned something earlier about like just like kids being taught lies in school. Like if you think about it this way, like everything is sort of a lie, right? All of these things are just like useful lies until we get the next one. Like we can create these models of our reality, right? But then we confuse those models for what our reality is, right? And so I think it's like I don't want to say that like like science is completely fake or whatever.
I get what you're saying, and I agree with you. Yeah.
You know?
I actually agree in your analysis. I do 100%.
Yeah.
Now, what I would say, I would counter though, that not everything is a lie. I think that there's a difference between getting something wrong and lying. Lying is intentionally knowing that you're telling something that isn't real. Whereas being wrong is where you're giving a piece of information, you trust it's correct, you disseminate that information to a group of people, but you're wrong. That doesn't mean that you're lying. You innocently gave wrong information.
Okay.
There's a difference.
Okay. Yeah, I'll concede that. I wasn't really like taking into consideration like intent or any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. It was just like whether or not something was true or not. But yeah, no, I'll concede that. I wanted to ask you something else earlier. You mentioned about like indoctrination in schools. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we could just go to the basic structure of school. It indoctrinates you to be a good worker slave. So you have it trains you, right? Like Pavlov's experiment with the dogs. You have bells that tell you when you can and can't go, when you're supposed to go to class, when your class is released. You have these set hours in which you can go outside and play for maybe a time. So it's indoctrinating you in a way to be a good worker for the man, which is exactly how they were intended to be, because the Rockefellers had a huge influence on the educational system as well as the medical system. But that's a whole nother topic, the medical system. But schools, in that basic sense, yes, they are indoctrination camps to train you to, and we can go deep into weeds with other subjects, particularly history is I majored in history in college. That's like my main, what I really enjoy doing. I studied political science as well. So those two things, I could tell you a lot of examples within history where it's like, it's not really true.
What history did you study?
I'm sorry?
What history did you study?
Yeah, so I did drop out, just disclaimer, because I did have no debt. And so long story short, I was going to go to law school, got the opportunity to go to a really good university here in Ohio, but then I was just out of debt. And I was like, be honest, I prayed. I had all the grades, I had all the qualifications, and everything told me not to do it. So I didn't do it, but I was going to focus more so in the 20th century, in regards to like the building of America as it is today, because I found characters like Theodore Roosevelt very inspirational, and FDR very inspirational. And so I wanted to learn more about that particular time in history. I studied a lot of Chinese history as well while I was in college for elective courses, because I'm very fascinated in Chinese history. But as far as my own personal study, I've done a lot of research in the Gilded Age, done a lot of research, as I've stated, on I didn't state this, but the relationship between America and China. So one of the best things that I've learned that I've took this into my own personal life is this, when it comes to history, is now I know how to do proper research. So that's one of the greatest skills that I've learned from college, is how to do proper research and look up firsthand documents, where to go, and try to, discern as best as I can. But as far as a particular area where I studied in history, can't really say I honestly had one while I was in college.
Oh, okay, that's fair. So like, how would you politically align yourself?
So I definitely am right leaning, but I do not identify with the Republican Party. I would consider myself a Christian nationalist.
Christian nationalist. Okay.
Yes.
So what? I mean, what's your opinion about like the Federal Reserve? I'm guessing you don't like the Federal Reserve banks at all.
No, I actually think that so it's a nuanced take, right? Has the Federal Reserve corrupted our economy? In a way, yes, obviously. Is there such thing as the Cantillon effect, where the Federal Reserve prints a bunch of money and then the wealthiest people get the money first? Yes, of course there is. However, we do live in a system where the Federal Reserve is the one printing our money. So it's like, oh, we kind of need them. Nobody, I think, in this chat, and nobody in the Western world for the most part, especially in the United States, some people with exception, of course, right? The Amish, maybe the Mormon, but most people require the economic system in which we have in place to live. So I accept them for what they are.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. It's just that's kind of confusing to me because it's like usury is a sin. So I don't know how you can reconcile that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. No, I think I'm with you. I think usury is a sin. I'm not for it. But also in the Bible, it states this, that you can use usury on foreigners, but not on your own people. And so there are loopholes, right? But I'm not justifying it whatsoever. I agree with you. I really like, I don't know exactly how the Islamic countries have their economic system set up, but I do know that they don't allow usury.
They have like a sort of like a hybrid pawning system where they have like collateralized like that's why like you'll see like a bunch of cars like just like laying out around Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of those are just like are technically kind of owned by the bank. I don't know. It's I don't know enough about it to like be like an expert on it.
Gotcha.
But yeah, no, they're like an actual theocracy and they don't like have any banks, which is also kind of like one of the things I never really understood about Christian nationalists is just how like, I mean, if you really believe in Christian nationalism, you'd probably want to go somewhere like along like Saudi Arabia and try to get rid of like banks in general. But like, I don't ever hear that from any Christians.
So here's the thing. I'm a realist, man. I know my particular situation. And do I want the Fed to collapse? Of course I don't, because I'm not prepared for a collapse of our financial system. So I'm giving you a realistic answer. Now I can give you an idealistic answer.
You think you could wean off of the,
you can.
Of the Federal Reserve?
You can. I agree with you.
You could have like tokenized systems for like specific commodities, like for food. Like I mean,
I 100% agree with you. But I'm just answering your question directly. So I mean, we can go on. We can go much more if you'd like. So I mean, idealistically, yes, there would be no Federal Reserve. That would be the ideal. However, I am very realistic into my life situation right now. I am slowly weaning my dependency from the system. You know, we live in an apartment right now, but I help out a local farmer twice a week, and we get about 5 gallons of raw milk from them. We get a bunch of meat. We get a bunch of milk. I'm not milk, but we get a bunch of cheese, butter, honey, etc. for the work that I do for them. So it's like I put in a few hours of work over there. We get a bunch of stuff in exchange. So that's the best thing that I can do in my personal life to help make us more self-sufficient and help out a local farmer. So I am all for that philosophy. This is actually a big thing we promote here at MOT, is to localize your supply chains and decrease your dependency on this global supply chain system as much as you can. But I'm also realistic in the sense that if I'm encouraging the end of the Fed right now, well, then I'm screwed. I'm screwed. Like, I'm not ready for that. But I am gradually preparing for that. And I do think, as you said, tokenizing is huge. I'm a big proponent of cryptocurrencies. I think cryptocurrencies will be the direct, people are concerned about a digital bank currency, and then this global economy taking place, or this globalism taking place where there's a one world government. But I actually see with cryptocurrencies the opposite happening, where it's going to allow for atomizations of people, or fractalizations rather is probably a better word, of societies to combat this one world system, if you will, where they are blatantly now talking about doing. So cryptocurrencies are a great tool to escape some sort of financial tyranny. But I'm just being, you asked me, what do I think about it? Told you it's a little nuanced. The Federal Reserve, do I think it should exist? No, I agree with what Andrew Jackson did back in the day, but I'm not going to sit here and be like, I'll do just fine without the Federal Reserve. That's insane of me. That's being unrealistic.
So how do you feel about capitalism? Are you like a free market guy or
To an extent. I mean, regulation should be had, right? So I'm not like one of these people. Like, for instance, if you believe in laissez-faire and the free market as it is, you would then allow any kind of sex trafficking, and I'm totally against that. You would then allow any kind of corn industry, if you catch my drift. I'm against that. But I'm not against people providing a good service and a good product for somebody that's beneficial to society as a whole. So do I believe in free markets? To an extent, but I also believe in good regulations as well.
Okay, so like, what do you think is overregulated right now? Like, what would you get rid of?
Good question. I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head, to be honest with you. I haven't looked much in. I'm not up to date on the certain regulations. I used to be, but off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you much.
Okay, because like I personally, like I identify like as a socialist. I have some like communist sympathies too. But like, I don't know. Like, what do you think about like basic needs? Like, do you think that should be provided for at all, or is that just leave it up to the free market?
I say so. I have a totally different view on that. So you may say that this is leaving up to the free market, but I would say that it's the family and community's job. As a Christian, I believe that you should treat your neighbor as you would treat yourself. So if your neighbor needed a piece of bread because they couldn't eat that day, they didn't make the money, then it's your obligation as a human being to provide your neighbor that. But that doesn't extrapolate out to somebody that isn't your direct neighbor, because neighbor means somebody living next to me. But somebody in a town over, I mean, I could help them out if I choose to, but my responsibility as a Christian, chiefly as a man, is to provide and protect for my family. And then any extra resources I have, I can help my community out with that. And then if, let's say, a neighbor had no place to stay, somebody that I may not even know, well, I would be obligated to let them stay somewhere in my home and say, you know what, I have to help you. But as far as the government intervening, I think that you go down a slippery slope once the government does that. So I'm not for safety nets on a governmental level. I'm for safety nets on a community level. That's the way it always has been throughout history, and it's a recent thing to where it's not. Families, as I talked about in the beginning of the show.
Yeah, the only reason they haven't been able to do that was just because like they weren't as globalized as we were. Like everybody that you knew was local to you, so it's not like you could have like some tax system that go to somebody that's like across the sea because like you didn't know those people.
Which I would say that it's better to be local and communal than try to be global. It's much better because I don't have anything to really connect with, even though I study Chinese history. And I went to school with a lot of Chinese people at the time where I was going here where I live, because it was, like I said, a really good school. So a lot of them went over there for law and medicine. And if I went back to their country, I would have almost nothing in common with them, other than the fact that we all have the divine spark, in my opinion, right? This is something I believe. So I believe that humans share a few things in common, but the main thing in common is our divine spark. So aside from that, it's going to be like, well, are you really my neighbor though? Like, you're really not my neighbor. We have so many differences. It doesn't mean that I can't help them out if I want to. But then once you start saying this globalist, like, oh, we've got to help out everybody in the world, I don't think that that's right, because it's going to take too many resources away from communities that need it more. So if you keep it local, first off, as I've stated in the beginning of the stream, I am a big proponent, and this is where I get the biggest psyop in the world no one talks about, is the separations of families. This idea that you should leave your home when you're 18. I think that kids should live with their parents forever, and their parents should live with their parents, and you should have multi-generational homes. If you have multi-generational homes, you would have no need for the insurance companies that are scams for the most part. You would have no need for social safety nets. And then the government would have to be much more moral, and the government would just be function a lot better if communities took care of their own.
Well, there's a couple of things. Well, I wanted to talk about the family thing too, because that's also a really interesting thing for me. You mentioned something about the neighbors and how like there's going to be some people that are different from you and all this stuff. They're going to have some differences, right? And so therefore, like, they're too different to view as your neighbor, right? What would be
No. I was very specific in what I said a neighbor was. A neighbor is somebody that lives next to me.
Yeah. Oh, okay, sure. I mean, in my head, I don't really see the distinction of proximity, right? Like, but like, when you said that like there's going to be people that are farther away from you, like what difference does it what's the fundamental difference that makes someone like 50 miles away from me, like that's suffering, any less?
Once again,
I don't know.
I've already addressed this. Yeah,
like it sounds like
I literally
will see no evil to me.
No, I literally addressed this, and I guess you didn't catch that. So if somebody is in another city than me, and I have the resources and capability to help them out, there's no issue with that. But my obligation, as I state, this is the second time I'm saying this, is my obligation as a man is to provide and protect my family. And then after I provide and protect my family, and then it becomes my community. The people right in my community, I have an obligation to help as a man provide and protect in ways that I can. Now, I'm a very resourceful man. I have a lot of at my disposal, whether that be influence, money, whatever that may be. Then I have more options to help people outside of my community and my family, because I can't go out and being so benevolent to everybody that my wife and children perish because I decide to give somebody from 2 cities away all of our food because they're starving. You get what I'm saying?
I don't think that you need to necessarily like starve to like have a conception of everybody.
That's not what I'm saying.
Country, right?
So think about what I'm saying though. I'm saying I will never put my family in any kind of jeopardy, even if it means that, well, we're not going to starve, but we're not going to have, maybe a meal tomorrow, but we'll be okay. We're going to have a little trouble paying the bills this month, but I helped out somebody. No. If anything's going to negatively affect my family or my community from somebody from the outside to a point where we may perish, I then have the right as a human being to determine if I want to do that or not. My whole point is my main obligation is first to my family, my wife and children. And then it becomes my community.
But like, here's the thing, like food stamps, I think it costs something like $20 out of like everybody's like fucking taxes or something.
Yep, it's very cheap.
Some ridiculously small amount. And the same thing could be said with like with homelessness. I think the last figures that I saw, and this is like 4 or 5 years ago, but it said that like in order to end it, you would have to pay like about $30 billion, which is nothing. It's basically just you're just paying rent at that point. That was like the cheapest solution that you could have, and it's $30 billion. That's like compared to everything else that we spend, right? Like this idea that like, oh, there's not going to be enough food for my family, so therefore I can't help these people. Like that's just, it's like a scarcity mentality to me. And so as a result, what ends up happening is because, you feel that there isn't this like this abundance, we end up like turning against each other. Like this distinction of like the community versus like my family. I feel like that's like an artificial line. Like if you go back like a couple like 10,000 years back to like when we're hunter gatherers, right? Like the community and your family was all one thing. Like
because they were incestual.
Because
they were incestual. Because they were incestual. Because they were incestual. So they literally were your family. But continue.
Can you repeat that again? Sorry, it's cutting out a little bit.
Yeah, well, you just use hunter-gatherers, but they were incestual. Yeah. So they literally were family. So your point doesn't stand to my point.
Wait, I'm sorry, it's cutting out again. There's like a little piece that I'm missing.
Hunter-gatherers were incestual, meaning that they all were family. The tribes were mostly all family, unless they acquired other tribes. That's another story. But they all started off with just being families, like literally families. And so for you, so let me ask you this. Yeah. Do you have a wife?
No, I don't. No.
So you don't have kids?
No, I don't. No.
So then there's going to be this world experience you and I totally differ on, because I will tell you what, I will choose my children over somebody else's children any day of the week. I will choose my wife over somebody else's wife any day of the week as far as protecting and providing for. And if you're a real man, you're going to agree with me. This is not something that's even debatable. This is human instinct. We provide because on an evolutionary level, right? I want to make sure my bloodline continues. And I want to make sure that the mother of my children can keep raising my children. So naturally, I'm going to choose them even over my community in some instances. So there is a distinct line between your community and your family, but your family is in the community. As a Christian, we believe on a theological level, Now, not all Christians do. I can't generalize that, but the Catholics and Orthodox believe that I have more of an obligation over my family than I do my neighbor. But that doesn't mean that doesn't mean I don't have obligation to my neighbor. But I have more obligation to my bloodline because God has blessed me with my children and my wife. So those are my blessings from God. It's showing that I'm doing the right things and I'm being fruitful. So I have an obligation to protect them.
Okay, great. Cool. There's this book. I read it a long time ago. It's called Sex at Dawn. Basically, it was this. I think it was an anthropologist, or I think it might have been like a psychologist.
I know the book.
He was writing about what.
I know the book. I know the book well.
Okay, great. So do you know the story about like about the anthropologist that goes to Papua New Guinea and then he sees that like there's no monogamy?
Yeah. So I have So I don't actually. So I think that monogamies are great for building civilizations. I do think that polygamy is natural. I don't think it's natural for the woman to have multiple partners. I think that that's the exception. What is natural is the most resourceful man to have multiple wives.
So, you said something interesting, that monogamy is good for building up. What was that? Nations?
Civilizations is what I said.
Civilizations. Okay. So there's this other book. For anybody that's just like tuning in, I just want to give them just a quick story about the Papua New Guinea. So there's this anthropologist that went to Papua New Guinea, and he noticed that like basically everybody was like having sex with everybody. There was no like monogamous pairs, and he goes up to one of the elders, and the anthropologist does, and he says, like, I don't understand, like how do you guys know which ones are your children, to love and care for, right? And then the elder turns to him and says, do you guys only love your children? Right. So earlier you mentioned something about like, it's evolutionarily beneficial to want to care for your kids. Right. Mm-hmm. But it's evolutionarily beneficial to want to care for all kids. Right.
Well, yes, to an extent, but you're using the exception to the rule. If you actually look throughout history, what you have in a polygamous environment, what you have is this: men with the most resources and the most dominant over time acquire the most women, because women are hypergamous. And so women want somebody that's going to be strong, intelligent, and has the ability to provide for them and is the leader of a hierarchy or works well within a hierarchy. That way her children, she knows, will continue on and have a good bloodline. So the most natural thing, the most common thing in the world is for a man, a resourceful man, to have a lot of women, and a non-resourceful man, your average man, not to really reproduce. Because throughout history, what is it, like only 30 to 40% of all the men in the world had reproduced, whereas almost 99% 20%. Of the women.
Yeah, it's pretty low.
Yes, whereas 99% of the women had reproduced. So the rule, so what you're saying is an exception. The exception does not disprove the rule. And I already accounted for the fact that there are exceptions. That yes, you can have exceptions where like that. But naturally, on the rule overall, that's not how it works. If polygamy is going to work for anything, it's going to be man, multiple women, and it's a few men with all of the women essentially. And this is why monogamy helps build civilizations, because that means your lower class man who's maybe a blacksmith, right? He now gets to have a family, and he's going to be more faithful to his woman than the alpha at the top. That's the king, who's like, I have everything in the world and every woman wants me. I don't even need to get women. Women come to me. So when you have that untampered, you then get what happens in the Middle East, where then you get a bunch of groups of men who are getting no play whatsoever, because all the powerful men are taking all the women, and so they then have to do other things that aren't as constructive. And so monogamy is really good for building cohesive civilizations. This is not even debatable.
So I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I'm going to say that it doesn't build civilizations. It builds specifically within Europe, right? Within the Western side of the world, right? It didn't build civilization so much as that it allowed the concentration of power. So if you look, there's a good book on this called by I think it's Esther Perel. I don't know. She talks about monogamy a lot. I'm not sure if this is about the history or not, but basically, if you look at the history of monogamy, specifically Christianity and marriage, that was basically a political weapon for rich families to consolidate power in land with other rich families.
Yep.
And then when they had offspring, they basically treated their children as, specifically their women, as like chess pieces to like then marry off to other families.
Yep.
So basically this institution was human trafficking.
No, that's totally wrong. I mean, it's not like
literally human trafficking.
No. I mean, this is something that's voluntary. This is something that they believed in.
No, it was
and also,
not voluntary. People did not marry for love.
No, this is political. Well, this is a misconception that people have today. Once again, you're not married, you don't have children, so it's hard for you to understand some of these things. But marriage is much more than love, my man. Marriage is a union between two people that are working together to build a family. And then my goal as a man, since I have daughters, I have 3 daughters, I'm going to make sure they marry somebody else that will, 1, not tarnish our name, 2, be able to continue what I have built or help with what I'm building, and 3, passing on property.
So you're deciding for them?
I'm sorry?
But so you're deciding for them though, right?
Yes, that is the man's job as a father. I can't let my daughter just date anybody. I can't. That would be irresponsible.
How are you going to stop them?
I'm sorry?
How are you going to stop them?
Well, it's not a matter of stopping them. It's a matter of raising them right. So there's nothing that's going to be...
You're letting them, though. So how would you not let them?
Once again, it's going to be the philosophical and theological groundwork that I build my family upon. And then the way that I lead.
But you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, you know? Like, I can teach my kid all this, like, theory about all of my ideas about the world. It doesn't necessarily mean
yes,
they're going
to
inherit it, right?
And so this is where your actions come in. And this is where your actions come in. And so once again, you're also talking about an exception, because most of the time in families that are loving, caring, and their fathers are strong, set boundaries, and act the way that they preach, the daughters want to find something like that. They do. This is the general rule.
I mean, do you think that happens often, though? Do you think that good families are common?
I'm sorry?
Do you think that good families like that are common?
No, I don't, because society is so degraded today.
So I mean, like,
but in other and by the way, it's a total misconception that this is a westernized thing. Once again, I studied a lot of Chinese history. This is exactly what they did in Asian countries too. It's a human phenomenon, my man.
I don't know enough about Chinese history.
I know, but you can't just say that it's just Western, because the Chinese would have their daughters would have endowments. And then so they would have these huge things. Even if they were poor, they would have something that their family would provide to the man, since the man was now taking over the role of the provider and protector that she was marrying. So this is a human phenomenon. This isn't a Western phenomenon. This is a human phenomenon.
But if it was a human phenomenon, then it'd be the same like all over the place, but it's not.
It mostly is. That's what I'm saying. And you can find exceptions. You can find exceptions.
How are you measuring mostly, though? Is it like contemporaneously, or are we looking at throughout time? Because throughout time,
once again, I'm talking historically.
Has not been the norm.
So nobody said that monogamy has been the norm. That's never once been my point.
Are you saying it's like? But I mean, I don't understand. Like, because we're saying that it's this thing that is this misconception that we see is only Western, when in reality it's a human thing, right? So that when I hear it's a human thing, I'm hearing it's applying across the board. Ergo, it's a norm.
It is a norm.
So okay,
but that doesn't mean, and so, but hang on. This is where you get confused, because you're conflating contemporary times with historical times. I've already addressed the historical point. The historical point was polygamy, men having a bunch of wives, was the historical norm. And then as we have become, I don't even know that we've become more civilized, but let's just say that we've become more civilized and we have nation states, we've become more monogamous. And this is also a norm.
Yeah. But I mean, but in the time frame that's happened, it's like, what history started, 10,000 years ago?
I don't know. Like nobody really knows, but yeah.
That's the latest that we have, like the Sumerian text. That's like the first like literature that we've ever found. It's like knots, I guess.
Yep.
But if you're saying that this thing is a human thing, right? You're sort of grounding this thing in our biology, right?
Yep.
And so for that to happen, right? That has to occur through like a long period of time in order for it to like have some type of like biological behavioristic.
And what are we talking
like,
about though
nature.
right now? Are we talking about monogamy or polygamy?
I'm talking about like monogamy, straight monogamy being uniform as a norm, right?
Yeah,
Well, I'm saying
so
monogamy is wait, hold on. I'm saying that monogamy is a really recent thing.
I agree.
And for the most of human history, which is, I feel like, I think we've been Homo sapiens for like at least 200,000 years. Like, I think it's more than that. Like, I'm pretty sure it's more than that.
Yeah.
But like the time frame for evolution to take place, right, is a lot more accommodating for that 200,000 years than in that one slice of 10,000, and not even just 10,000 years, because we also have to look at like, you know, the start of Christianity, and that's like it's less than that. And my point is like these behaviors aren't adaptive like from a genetic standpoint. They're a behavioral standpoint, and it was adapted specifically to accommodate the political structures of the time, which was, you know, rich families basically trying to like marry into each other. That's why like all these like European royalties are like incestuous. Like they're all related to each other. The Romanovs were cousins with the who are the people in the UK? What's their last name?
I don't know, but I know who you're talking about.
The Queen. I don't know what her last name is, but like all those people were related, and it's just because of this like concept of monogamy, and we've dressed it up a little bit as like it being this godly thing, but it isn't.
No,
like,
I never.
It was kind of to cover up a really ugly thing, which was basically selling off your like kids to like another family to, I don't know, end a war, or like what's it called? Or people would take wards too. Like, I don't know if you've watched Game of Thrones, but when they took Sansa, or they took the other kid, like the opposite family, like that was a way to like ensure that like there would be peace, because now I have a hostage, and then that hostage would get married off, and like yeah, dude, it's
So first off, I agree that it has not been the norm. Yeah. I'm not going to go down an evolutionary route with you, because we probably differ very much so on that. But my point, as I've stated before, is that it helped build the civilization in which we live in today. Monogamy. Once again, it is more natural for men that are the most dominant, that are the most superior over other men, to acquire all the women. That is the most natural thing that happens. Am I against it? No. I think that God allows it in the Bible. Most of the patriarchs in the Old Testament and New Testament have more than one wife. So there's nothing ungodly about being polygamous, just like there's nothing ungodly about being monogamous. You can be, but like you can have a society that allows for both. However, it should favor monogamy, because monogamy will allow you, a man, not saying you specifically, who knows, you might be a chiseled Chad, I don't know. But, you know, it will allow for your average worker, your average man, to acquire a wife, which would be super hard to do if you have just nothing but polygamy. Super, super hard. And so I get your point with the historic, but we disagree on that fundamentally. You think it's a bad thing? I think it's a good thing. So I don't think we can agree to disagree on that point.
Yeah, well, it's like I feel like we're going to go back to like the civilization thing, and like I don't necessarily see that as something that's embedded in our civilization. I see it as more as like embedding these like political dynasties. Like you have like there are some really old families that you can literally date back to like fucking Babylonian times that are still around, impressive, that have massive amounts of wealth that has gone nowhere as we've like passed through feudalism, through, you know,
and why don't we try to learn from them? What we complain about the elite, but why don't we try to learn from them and take their playbook? Maybe not so much with the incestual part, but
because it's a made-up game.
It is a made-up game, but you live inside the made-up game. You can't escape the made-up game. So if you can't escape the made-up game, play the made-up game. Play it very well.
The only reason you can't escape the made-up game is because you think you can't escape the made-up game. We have this like self-fulfilling prophecy where because we can't think of something beyond capitalism, we think that like, oh, this is just basically it. Like there's a quote that said like it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism, right? Like all of these
This has nothing to do
whether
with
when you call it
capitalism, my man.
or feudalism, right? Like it's all the same sort of oppressive, like upper class versus the lower classes. And
Yeah, you're right.
You believe in the free market, though, right? Like,
So
you believe in like
I
capitalism, and
I totally agree. I totally agree that the upper class have a much more powerful hand than the lower class. But guess what? We live in a time where now you can play the game, my man. So why not play the game? And also, if you're a man, then you have this innate desire to want to conquer something. You just do. It's a manly thing. And so if you're going to conquer something, why not try to be the best you can in the game, acquire as much resources as you can? You are, whether you like it or not, you are a part of the game. Everybody here is a part of the game, except the fact that you're a part of the game. We're all playing a game of chess or Go, right? You have no choice. You're locked here for 80 years, and all you can do is play this game. So might as well get really good at the game, is what I'm saying. If the game becomes socialism, if the game becomes communism or socialism,
Cuba did not play the game. There's a bunch of people that did not play the game, and have you ever played Monopoly?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Can you imagine playing the game Monopoly halfway through the game? Would you be at an advantage or a disadvantage?
It would depend.
It would depend. No, if you're starting halfway through the game, right after everybody's gone around.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you asked if I quit halfway through the game.
No. I'm saying if you play the game, right, and then you decide to jump in halfway through it, you're going to be at a disadvantage, correct?
Dude, so once again, we're going to fundamentally disagree. I think that life is inherently unfair, and I think that that's not a bad thing necessarily.
I agree, but there are degrees, though.
No, so what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily bad life is unfair. It's just the way it is. I accept that that's life. It's part of the game. Life
sounds like defeatism to me. Like
it's not. I'm over here. I'm over here being extremely inspirational, saying, guess what? The cards are stacked against you if you weren't born into a rich family. But you know what? You, as a man, you can choose to conquer certain things, and you can get really good at those things and become up there in the upper classes. You know what? And let's say it's socialism, right? Let's say it's socialism or communism. Well, good thing I know a thing or two about Chinese history, because there are a bunch of low peasants who made their way up by taking tests, right? Because in China, it was like, you want to get into the government, you got to pass a bunch of different tests. You got to pass your local test, state test, and then the federal test, right? So you pass all those tests, you study really well, boom, now you're part of the elite. In every system there is, it is 100% true. I'm telling you exactly what Chinese history was. So, and also, dude, so let's look at this too. So you have Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln, both came from nothing, bro. And now they're like part of American gods, if you will, right? So, and anytime. Now, is it rare? Yes, it's rare. It's rare even in today's society. But the point is, you're here. Play the game.
Okay, but play the game of capitalism?
Play the game of life. I just told you that it can be communism, like under the dynasty of the Chinese for 1,000 years. You can play the game in there and then work your way to the elite. Fact. You can play the game all the time. It doesn't matter if it's socialism, communism, fascism. Play the game, and you can acquire wealth.
Right now, but I'm saying the game that we have right now, specifically capitalism, right, is it's not only like just bad for humanity.
Stop talking about capitalism. We're talking about life.
It's bad for innovation.
Life. And no, capitalism is good for innovation, man. This is like it is.
I'm going to prove to you why it isn't.
That's the life with good or bad decisions with you made. Yes. Dude, we're going to fundamentally disagree on these things. Like, life is unfair. Life is a game that you're playing. It doesn't matter if it's communism, capitalism, fascism, socialism.
We could change things, though, right? We could change the systems that we built.
If you want to, but it's still a game. It's still a game. You're missing my fundamental argument here. Life is a game. You can have different rules for the game. Play the game to the best of your ability. That's all I'm saying.
Make the game better.
Well, okay, so that Dude, I'm not disagreeing with you. You're missing my point. It doesn't matter if you're communist, if you're socialist, if you're capitalist. You can look at life fundamentally as this kind of game. And then you can be different rules to the game. You can improve the game. You can make the game worse. Doesn't negate the fact that you're still in the game. So play the game. That's my whole point.
Well, I'm talking about capitalism, though. I'm not talking about like life.
I don't care what you're talking about. I'm talking about.
When I say
I'm talking about
game,
fundamentals.
I'm talking about specifically like the money system that we have, right? When I asked you like if you played Monopoly before, like Monopoly originally was supposed to be like a metaphor for like capitalism, right?
Okay.
That's the main reason that I brought it up to you.
You live in the game of capitalism, my man. So play the game, and if you want to change the game, try and change the game. That's your prerogative.
So I mean, I could use that same argument for like feudalism, though, right? Like, oh,
you
live
can
in feudalism, play the game, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Exactly. That's my point. I'm arguing on first principles of life. I'm not arguing on the game. I'm not arguing on the rules that are built upon the principle. I'm talking about the principle, my man. So yes, once again, I've already addressed this. I don't think that you're listening. Feudalism, capitalism, communism, socialism, fascism, they're all rules, but the game is still life. Play the game, the hand that you're dealt. That's all you can do. That's all you can do. And guess what? You can change the game. You can win the game.
Okay, but I'm talking about specifically about capitalism, though, dude. That like earlier I asked you, like I could prove to you that that capitalism isn't equitable, right?
Nobody cares that it's equitable. Nobody cares. I've already accepted that life's unfair. Socialism isn't equitable.
It could be though.
It can't be. Do you know that? Do you know? I can tell you right now. There's a law in nature. It's called the Pareto distribution or Pareto's law. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I know what it is.
The 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule. You can apply that to everything in life. Swear to God. Money, houses. You can. I've done it. I've written. I have academic papers. It's actually interesting. I have papers on this. I do have papers on this. I don't know if I can find them, but yes, there are. You can apply it to economics. You can apply it to housing. You can apply it to food. It's going to always be. You can apply it to companies.
Are you a fan of Jordan Peterson?
I'm sorry?
Are you a fan of Jordan Peterson?
No, I think that man's evil.
Oh, okay. Why do you think he's evil?
I think he's a Satanist. I think he's a Satanist. I think he's trying to. He's a gatekeeper for positive nationalism. He's a tool of the elite to push in nefarious agendas. I don't like him at all. And also, he's not that smart. He's not that smart. He's quite insane too.
Points that you're making, I've heard him make. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. So I mean, so this is the thing that people have a hard time with. You can agree on certain points. Just because I agree with the point he made a valid point. The point isn't invalid because I don't like him. I don't like him, but he made a valid point. Is that who I learned it from? It is. And then I did my own research, and then I wrote papers on it. And it's real. It's a real thing. It's a real thing. It doesn't matter that I don't like him. I particularly don't like him right now because of his attack and mischaracterizations of Christianity. He's pretending to go through this Christian phase, but it's also to demoralize Christians. But that's a whole other thing. I have a lot of issues with Jordan Peterson. But just because you disagree with somebody doesn't mean you can't learn from them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree, but I'm just saying that like they're like, if you don't disagree with somebody, I'm sorry, if you do disagree with somebody, there are obviously going to be some aspects of your like ideologies that are not commensurate, you know what I mean? Like the same thing with what we're talking about right now, right? We're talking about like life in general, right? In abstract, right? And then with like the mini games in that big game, right? When the mini game that I was talking about was capitalism, right? And capitalism sort of spread from fucking European mercantilism that bloomed out of fucking then industrial fucking UK, like it's a whole thing, dude.
You can say the same thing. So, like the communist revolution in Russia was that that wasn't cool at all. The Bolsheviks did that, and that wasn't cool at all. And there was a bunch of foreigners taking it over too, by the way, that many people don't know about that. But yeah, look into the Bolshevik Revolution. You'll see who is really behind it.
I know a bit about it.
Yeah, you look into the Bolshevik Revolution, you see that they weren't necessarily Russia or Russians, and they didn't really necessarily have, or the Soviet Union, whatever you want to call it. They didn't necessarily have Russia's best interest in mind. And also, it didn't work out that well. I mean, hey, they survived for a while. They did okay. But they're obviously functioning better.
Do you know what it was like before? Do you know what it was like before, though?
Yeah, I mean, it was an agrarian society. So basically, the Soviet Union, what it did is it propelled, and they had debates about this. They were like, well, hang on, because Marxism is post-capitalist. So do we require a capitalist society first and then introduce socialism? Or do we just skip the capitalist part and go to social? They did the latter. And this is why Stalin, for all the tragedies he did, he was a great leader in many regards. I can say some very good things about Stalin, just like I can say some good things about Mao. And this goes once again to being able to think certain people are bad, but it doesn't mean that you can't find good qualities in their character and good things that they did. So Stalin, what he did is he was able to collectivize everything and propel it into an industrial society where it is now. Cool. Awesome. A lot of people died. It is what it is. A lot of people die every day. That's the nature of the world.
Was the Soviet Union better than the Romanovs regime or whatever?
No, I am a fan of, having, I would not be opposed to having kings. I think that that's also more natural. So it's debatable.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, the kings. I disagree with that very strongly.
That's cool.
But yeah, no, I mean, if you look at what pre-Soviet Russia was, like what the Soviet Union was basically able to do was pretty remarkable. Like the amount, like the literacy that went up.
Yeah, I agree with you.
A bunch of things that went up. So it's like I when people say like, oh, the Soviet Union was bad, like I don't know what they're comparing it to. So sorry, I was reading some of these comments.
It's all good.
But yeah,
I agree with you. I literally just said that Stalin propelled Russia into industrial society, and some people think that's a really good thing. He made him a richer society, right? There, yeah. Cool, awesome, cool.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking like pre-Stalin specifically.
But Stalin is the one. Stalin is the main figure. This isn't debatable. Stalin is the main figure who propelled them because he did it by force, the same way Mao did.
Yeah, but I mean, Stalin also got rid of a lot of the unions, and just like I don't know enough about Russian history to like be able to like get into this in depth, but yeah, I do know that like just at the beginning there was a lot of like there were a lot of benefits from going from the like fucking kingdoms into a more representative union, I guess. But
debatable because they're still new.
I'm sorry?
I said that's debatable because the representative unions. And the only reason I say it's debatable is because of this. This is objective, right? There hasn't been an equal amount of time to really compare the two. These are relatively new systems in what we have. Kingships, monarchies, autocracies have been around much longer. So, maybe in another 1,000 years or so, we can have a better conversation to see what society was better. But yeah, but it has been good talking to you.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, I just want to say one more.
Go ahead.
How would you have any sort of accountability for a king or a czar or an emperor?
So this is a great question. Yeah, this is
sorry.
Good. No, it's a great question that you ask, and this is a point that I address to a lot of people. So, and I'm not trying to be condescending. I just know that I can say some things that get people focused on one thing. So just really listen closely to what I'm trying to say here. In a democracy or a republic, you have multiple people that can represent you, right? And so there's multiple avenues of corruption. Undisputable.
Okay.
This is true. Multiple avenues of corruption. And then additionally, since more of the population is voting, you now add another attack vector for corruption. So you have multi-layered corruption coming in to the governmental structure, whether it be or to the society at large. And then it becomes this spider web of corruption that's really hard to point at. As a socialist, I'm sure you're going to be like, there's the spider web of corporations that conspire together to keep the man down. I could be wrong, and I don't disagree with you. There are conspiracies in corporations. There are conspiracies in governments. But then when you have a republic or a democracy, something like that, that's quote unquote more equitable to the people, you offer more opportunities of corruption at large. You following me?
I mean, I don't agree, but sorry, continue.
So you don't agree that you allow for more corruption? So let me point it this way. Let me ask you this question. Do you think that our Congress is and the president are basically owned by corporations, most of them?
I do agree.
Awesome. So now you agree with what I'm saying. There's more opportunities. Yes. So how can't you? So once again, if you have Republican, if you have a Republican Democrat, if you have a Republican, I can't even talk. You have a republic, you have a democracy. You're offering more opportunities for quote unquote corporations to infiltrate a dispersed amount of people. and you also have the same to do with the public, right?
Yeah.
So these things that we already see, we know it's true because we're looking at our government and we're looking at other democracies and republics, and we see that corporations can easily influence votes. There's lobbies. They have more economic power to lobby, right? This is the corruption I'm talking about. So there's more attack vectors for corruption in a governmental structure as such. Whereas in a and also the other issue is you have these term limits. These term limits mean that they're going to be into preserving their spot of power more often than not, because as a socialist, I'm sure that you agree that a lot of things have to do with acquiring power. And so they can't hold on to their position of power very much. If they have a 2-year term as their House of Representatives, they have a 6-year term. So they're going to be focused on keeping their lobbyists happy. So that way they keep getting funded. And then not only their lobbyists, but then their political entities as well. So that way they have political support and financial support. And then their political support can turn into financial support as well. And then their messages become skewed to the masses in a certain way. But then the masses are also being corrupted by the corporations to like big pharma, to like big farms, big agriculture, to like big media, to like all these things, right? So everybody's being corrupted in some way, shape, or form in these societies, and it's harder to pinpoint who exactly is doing it. And it's in their interest to remain corrupt sometimes, most of the time. Whereas in a monarchy, your attack vectors of corruption are extremely limited. And the king and his family will have to literally live forever, unless they get overthrown, in the decisions the king makes. Because his son probably take it over. And if his son takes it over, or they have some more electoral system within their nobles to get elected to king, whatever, somebody, their families, the elite families are going to feel the pressures of society more. And the attack vectors for corruption are greatly reduced. And because of their greatly reduced, and because of the fact that the king and the nobles that are really running the show are more connected to the people in a way because they have to be, you then will get a more moral society. It'll be easier. It doesn't mean that they can't be corrupted. I agree with you. Kingships can be corrupted. Over time, they fail, of course, as do democracies and republics. So that argument, not really good. I'm not saying you're going to make it. But all these arguments get corrupted and fail over time. My argument is this. There's less attack vectors for a monarchy than there is for democracies or republics. And the king and the nobles have to be more connected to the people because their families will have to endure any bad decision they make.
Okay, well, what I gotta say to that is that if I'm a corrupting agent, right? Let's say I'm a massive international conglomerate that sells everything, right? For me to corrupt a democracy versus me to corrupt a monarchy or whatever sort of like strongman system you could put up, right? I need to corrupt so many more people in order to control that system than I do if it's just a king, right? If I can just corrupt a king, that's one linchpin, and then I can corrupt the whole system, right?
Yep.
I only need to get that one person, as opposed to democracy, where I would need to fund, how many ever representatives, right? So this issue isn't necessarily something that's embedded within democracy per se, but it's just something that democracy is taking place on top of, which is capitalism, right? Which is this like, you said vector earlier, which is it's a vector for influence, right? For vector for power that we have that's artificial, that we've invented, and then we built all these other systems on top of it, and then we blamed all the systems on top of it for the failings of the thing that we, foundationally created. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yep.
So, I mean, yeah,
I would say this.
I don't know, you could say that like a monarchy would be less corrupt simply when like
I'm saying
that you need to.
I'm saying you missed one key component. I'm saying it would be harder to corrupt because corruption would mean the king and his family would have to pay for the price of corruption more likely than the price of corruption for a senator or a representative, a House of Representative. And additionally, it is much harder for somebody to get to the king directly. There's a solidified chain of command in order for you to get to real decision makers. That is very hard to get to. So like the Chinese, for instance, they had this interesting system set up. So the British and the United States wanted to do trading over there. And so they allowed it because the Chinese at the time were like, you know what, we'll allow some, people to come over, but they called them foreign devils. They called them sea barbarians. And the king, the emperor, was like, I have nothing to do with them. I will not deal with them. They have to go through the Barbarian Management Bureau, is what it's called. It's what it's called. The Barbarian Management Bureau. And the king, or the emperor, rather, never dealt with anybody. Anybody. That doesn't mean that they didn't become corrupt. They did become corrupt, of course. However, my point is, you have a bit your wall of protection is much greater and stronger in a monarchy than it is a democracy or a republic. That's my whole point. And there's proof for it. It's much harder to get influence over decision makers in a monarchy than it is to get to a decision maker in a democracy or a republic. Because they're more accessible. They have to be more accessible too. They just have to be.
I'm getting a little bit of a loop here. Sorry, I'm hearing your voice a couple of times over.
Okay.
But I think I'm gonna head out too. I was gonna head out earlier, but
yeah, it's all good.
It was good talking to you, dude.
Likewise. Have a good one, man. All right. So let's see if there's any comments that I didn't address. Cops save lives every day. They do. Nobody disagrees. Problem is representative. The weak and the elderly will be the first exploited if police are defunded. Probably, but we're heading towards a privatized security system. This dude trusts people so much. Even if they got voted out, they still get paid. Yeah, true. It's called a revolving door, right? And yes, we are heading towards a you can go back, listen to the beginning of my stream. That's where we are heading. What's going on, man?
So, Defund the Police. It's a private. It's a definitely an interesting method.
Well, I'm not saying that I'm in support of it. I'm saying that this is what's happening. And if you were here at the beginning of the show, I basically stated there's a movement to defund the police, just like. So let me draw the framework here, where I'm coming from. So the police, for a really long time, they wanted body cameras for their own protection. But for a long time, the government says, we don't really need to spend that much money. Okay, we're not going to spend that money on you. And BLM comes around. A lot of things take place where BLM's accusing the police of being bad guys and demanding they have body cameras. You know what the police departments did across the nation? A lot of the upper departments were like, let's agree with BLM so we get our cameras. So what we have here is kind of the opposite of this. So we have this defund the police movement. And the reason we have this defund the police movement, I say the real reason is because there's a pension fund crisis. You can look it up, or you can just listen to the show from earlier on YouTube, MOT Media. This is where you can find this episode after we get done with this. They have a pension fund crisis, and this is in private and public sector. And there's a pension benefit gratuity corporation that's supposed to be the safety net for pensions. They're insolvent. So there's a huge issue amongst public employees getting paid their pensions. So there's, in my opinion, this attempt to get rid of police because the pension funding isn't there. And then police are going to be going more into privatized security and policing because the pay will be better. And they'll just basically, what we'll have is cops for Walmart, cops for Target, cops for people who can afford it, cops for communities that can afford it. And there's this article out right now that retail stores are already doing that because there's not enough police. And so what would be the next logical step for a well-trained police officer? Well, it's either the military or security. And if you're going to get paid very well to still be at home with your family, and we're already going to defund the police because it's an orchestrated attempt to sort of do away with the things we can't afford because we're having this economic collapse. And so we're simultaneously rebuilding, right? These people are smart. There's a collapse, and so they're building simultaneously. And so the build is privatized police forces. And we see this in South Africa right now. Do some research into South Africa, and you'll see a real life example of what I'm talking about.
Definitely interesting. I had some stuff to look up now. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that it's a good thing to defund the police. I'm not saying I think the police do what they're supposed to do. I think it's better for society as a whole to have a police system, especially for the public. However, is it really becoming better or is it becoming worse? I think that you're getting lesser quality people in the police. There was a recent, about 15 years ago, a Supreme Court decision made that police do not have an obligation to protect or serve their people. You can look it up. And so it's becoming slowly corrupted. So it's like, would it just be better to hire a private security guard, which essentially the police serve as a private security guard for the government. So why not level the playing field and you be able to have your own private security team? And let's say you can't afford it, fair. Well, then get 10 people that you know that will come in together and fund your own private security or become your own
like
private
one of
security.
those, what do you call it? Neighborhood watch people?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, definitely interesting. It's interesting enough for me to definitely put some research into it. I'll definitely look into it. But what I want to know is, how do we know they're not going to be corrupt? Because I know in Mexico, because the government's really corrupt there, and
Oh, give me a second. Sorry, hang on if you can hear me.
corrupt.
Say that again.
I've been there a while, and it's not good.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, how do you really? It's based on your morality. And then it's localized morality. That's what's going to determine the level of corruption. And yes, the police are already corrupt, as somebody rightfully points out in the comment. But I think his point is how do you keep them from becoming corrupt? And my argument is you just have to have a good moral structure in order to keep them from becoming corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And if that structure erodes over time, corruption will inevitably creep in. What's the new plan then?
Yeah.
What's the new plan? I've already said it. The plan is privatized police departments. So, yeah, anything else that you want to talk about on here?
Science skeptic.
Yep, the reproducibility crises that's going on. I did a deep dive into it at the beginning of the show. Basically, it's all the fields in science from physics, chemistry, biology, medicine, psychology, sociology. There's a huge problem with being able to reproduce their findings, a lot of their findings. And so I was just bringing attention to the fact that one should be skeptical of what they hear as a scientific study today, because there's a lot of corruption going on in the field. And we went over exactly where that corruption comes from in the beginning of the show as well. So, yeah, that's what we were touching on there.
Yeah, double check, triple check stuff.
Yep.
Did you hear about, what was it? There was something that Fauci, that Dr. Fauci dude, who was, there was you could take zinc and something about.
Let's be careful on where we're going with this, just in case. But let's just call him Dr. F and certain medications that he said.
Yeah, because he never talked about zinc or any of these other supplements that you could take to help.
Yep. I know where you're going. Yep. I get it. Let's just tread this very carefully.
There was no advocacy for healthy eating, no exercise. I never seen it ever in my school. It was just take the vaccine, get that and get it over with. So I'll definitely be a little skeptical. And then I found out, there was some weird thing with like fetal material in the vaccine. I was like, oh,
well,
man,
let's be careful. Let's stop using that word to begin with. Just call it an injection. Call it a jab. Because this is also on YouTube, and so this video is probably going to get taken down in like a month now, but that's okay.
Yeah, but yeah, I agree that we should remain skeptical.
Yeah, that's
about
all.
Things we hear.
Yep, that's all.
Yeah. And then what's that third thing?
The PSYOP no one talks about, and it was in regards to central banks essentially presenting this idea that influencing this country really to say, when your kid's 18 years old, tell him to get out of the house. And then that way, guess what? Instead of just having one mortgage, one car payment, one utility bill, the central bank now has 5 utility bills, 5 mortgages, 5 car payments. Why? Because you told your kid when they're 18 they got to get out of the house. Whereas, if you have done what humans have done for a long time, and that is be a proponent of multi-generational households. That way you just have maybe no mortgage, maybe no car payment, but you got insurance payments, right? And then you only have one utility bill. And then you can pull all your resources together. You become stronger that way. But that's the biggest PSYOP, is to tell your kids to move out when they're 18. I think that kids should live with their parents forever and parents should live with their parents forever. Yeah.
Yeah, because in my family doesn't do that, pushing out kids when they're older. Yeah, they definitely understand how that would have some complications.
For sure.
Because it's better to just stay with your family, because you already have some foundation to work off of, like for school, for getting a job. As
100%.
long as you're actively, doing your part to become a better person, there's no problem with it.
100%. And then somebody in the comments says being pushed out was the best thing that ever happened to me. Yeah, people have bad parents. People have bad upbringings. But overall, the rule should be you remain with your family forever, because they're the ones who raised you, loved you, brought you into the world. So they're the ones that will, most of the time, care about you more than society, some job, some institution. So yes, I moved out. I don't live in the same state that I was born in, but I will raise my family in a certain way to where we have multi-generational homes.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I got to get going. You have a good day.
Thanks. You too, man. All right. Peace. All right. So let's see here. Anybody else want to hop in, talk about any of these things? Let's see. Slave catchers become policemen. Okay. Bill Clinton 12. I don't think you understand that nobody here's like saying defund the police is a bad thing or a good thing. I'm just telling you a pattern I see in the trajectory that it's on. That's all. Explain to me where the pattern and trajectory is off. That's all. I'm talking to one person, not you. Okay, fair enough. You just didn't at anybody. So if you don't at anybody, obviously going to think it's me. And then we also had somebody else comment in here. It was, I don't get this. We should, anyway. So why don't they print more money to pay the pensions? Also, apparently it doesn't cause inflation. Mischaracterization. I would appreciate it if my own team would not mischaracterize my statements, because you know damn well that's not at all what I say. It's not at all. So, and you can't just print more money, because then you have to get into more debt. My bad. It's all good. Too many anti-police. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's good to be necessarily anti-police. They serve a purpose, right? They're not all bad. They do serve a purpose as an institution. The whole point here is that there's a certain trajectory laid out. I'm presenting to you some evidence that would suggest this is the pattern and where we're heading. My family didn't want me, bro, so that's not going to work. Yeah, I just said some people have horrible families. I'm sorry to hear that, man. Evolution is real. Okay. Let's see if I missed anything else here, and then we'll probably get out of here unless anybody else wants to hop on, have a chat, or have any other question, comments. Treat the adults with the new. All right. So, well, I guess we got somebody here. It says Mr. Yonks, I'm not sure. Hi, I'm confused by the title. Are you a part of Steam refunds for the new SWAT game? I only got an hour and a half, or I wasn't a big fan because I got 20 bucks. No, I don't know what you're talking about. All right, guys, I'm out of here. I hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to like, share, subscribe everywhere. MOT Media, MOT News, and MOT Sports. Specifically on TikTok, MOT Media is the backup to the backup channel. MOT Today is the backup channel. And MOT News is the main channel. So you guys have a great day. Thank you for tuning in. Much love. Peace.